All right, ready to jump into another deep dive. This one is a Supreme Court case that's been making the rounds online, sparking a lot of debate here in the Philippines.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one.
It really makes you think about, like all those agreements we make, even the ones that aren't, formally written down.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine this. You manage to negotiate a lower tax bill.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's happy,
Mm.
right? You've got a deal. But then you think, hey, why not try to get that money back too? Is that even possible?
He was a little sneaky.
Well, that's the whole question at the heart of this case. Commissioner of Internal Revenue, that's the CIR, versus Toledo Power Company.
It's 23.
Yeah, 2023. And it really digs into the nitty-gritty of, what counts as a binding agreement, especially when it comes to taxes.
Definitely a case with lots of layers to peel back.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's set the scene. We've got Toledo Power Company, a domestic corporation running power plants here in the Philippines. They get audited for tax year 2011. Yeah, and bam, they're hit with a potential tax bill of over PHP 92 million.
Whoa, that's a hefty sum. What was it all about?
Well, there were a few issues, but the one that really caught everyone's attention was their sale of power to Carmen Copper Corporation, CCC.
Okay, and what's the issue there?
The Bureau of Internal Revenue, that's the BIR, wanted to slap a 12% VAT on those sales.
Even though CCC is an exporter.
Exactly. And usually sales to exporters are zero rated.
That's what I thought.
So why did the BIR want to impose that VAT? Initially, their argument was that raw materials and packaging, those are usually zero rated when sold to exporters. But the sale of power, different story, they said.
So they acknowledged the cross-border doctrine.
Right, meaning that VAT shouldn't be part of the cost of goods leaving the Philippines.
Yeah.
But they still wanted to impose the VAT. What was their logic there?
I'm curious, too.
So they said that only the portion of power sales that were directly tied to CCC's production costs, just that portion should be zero rated.
So they were trying to split it up.
Yeah, anything used for general expenses or admin stuff, that should be subject to the 12% VAT, they argued.
Okay, so did Toledo just accept that and pay the full $92 million?
Actually, no. That's where things get kind of strange. They ended up paying $6.9 million in VAT.
So a fraction of the total.
Way less than the initial assessment, right? And this happened just about a month after they got the preliminary assessment notice from the BIR.
The PAN.
Yeah, the PAN. But here's the thing. They paid before getting the final assessment notice, the FAN.
That's not the usual process, is it?
Not really.
Yeah.
And that's part of what makes this case so interesting. The records aren't clear on what exactly went down during that investigation. Did Toledo just pay to avoid more trouble? Did the BIR agree to drop the rest in exchange for that smaller amount? It's not totally clear.
Okay, so we've got a power company facing this huge tax bill, a dispute over VAT on those sales to an exporter, and then this kind of mysterious payment that seems to settle things, at least for the moment. What happened next?
Well, this is where things get even more interesting. Just 52 days after making that payment, Toledo files for a full refund of the $6.9 million. Yeah. They claimed they paid it, quote, erroneously.
Bold move.
It is. And they pointed to a revenue memorandum order that supports zero rating for sales to exporters like CCC. They also argued that since there was no FAN issued, the initial assessment was unauthorized.
So they were using the lack of clarity around that settlement to try and get their money back?
Exactly. Did it work? Well, initially, yes. Both the Court of Tax Appeals, Second Division, and the N-Bank, they sided with Toledo.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. They ordered the BIR to issue that refund.
Case closed then.
Not quite. This is where the Supreme Court steps in and throws a wrench in the works. They completely overturned the lower court's decisions and denied the refund.
Wow, complete 180. What was their reasoning? Why such a big change?
Well, here's where it gets really fascinating. The Supreme Court, in their decision, this is Commissioner of Internal Revenue versus Toledo Power Company, GR num 259309, dated February 13, 2023. By the way, if anyone's keeping track, they interpreted Toledo's payment as an informal settlement. So basically, a negotiated agreement to end the investigation in exchange for that smaller payment. And they said that created a binding contract that Toledo couldn't just back out of.
So from the Supreme Court's perspective, it was a done deal. Once Toledo made that payment, they were stuck with the terms of that informal agreement, even if they later regretted it.
Exactly. And they even cited the principle of estoppel.
Ah, I was wondering when that would come up.
Which basically means you can't go back on your actions, especially if those actions influenced how the other party acted. They pointed to Toledo's silence about why they paid, if they thought it was wrong.
That's interesting.
That silence actually worked against them in court.
Fascinating. So even without a formal written contract, the Supreme Court said that Toledo's actions, or rather their inaction in explaining the payment, had legal consequences. It really highlights the power of communication, or the lack of it, in legal matters.
Right, and it makes you think twice about assuming anything, especially when it comes to legal stuff, right?
Absolutely.
But the Supreme Court's decision didn't stop there. They went even further and highlighted why they couldn't allow Toledo to get a refund. They were worried about setting a precedent, opening the door for taxpayers to try to, manipulate the system.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah, they were thinking about the bigger picture. What kind of impact would this have on future tax disputes? And what about the overall integrity of the system? Imagine if anyone could just settle a tax bill, then turn around and immediately file for a refund.
Yeah, total chaos. Everyone would be trying to game the system.
Exactly. It would completely undermine the whole tax collection process. But this brings up an interesting question. What if Toledo had clearly stated that their payment was made under protest or with some kind of reservations? Could that have changed things?
That's a really good question.
Right. It's impossible to say for sure, but clearly stating that disagreement, right then while making the payment would definitely strengthen their case. By doing that, they would preserve their right to challenge it later.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, big takeaway for everyone listening. When you're dealing with legal stuff, especially taxes, clear communication is key. Don't assume anything. Get everything in writing. And if you're unsure about anything at all, talk to a legal professional. Always better to be safe than sorry.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
This case really emphasizes the importance of understanding what you're getting into, right? The potential implications of any agreement, even the informal ones.
Definitely. Think before you act, or in this case, before you pay.
This whole CIR v. Toledo Power Company case has sparked so much debate, and for good reason. It touches on some really fundamental principles of law and taxation that affect all of us.
Yeah, it really makes you think.
It does. It's a good reminder that the law is constantly evolving, and staying informed about these changes is crucial, not just for lawyers, but for everyone. So whether you're a business owner, a taxpayer, or just someone interested in how our legal system works, this case offers some really valuable insights. And if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, remember those key takeaways. Be clear, be upfront, and be informed.
Well said. It's also important to remember that this particular case, it focused on an informal settlement during a tax investigation. But those legal principles involved, like estoppel, have broader implications too. They apply to other areas of law as well.
That's a great point. So while the specifics of this case relate to tax law, those underlying concepts, they're relevant to all sorts of legal disputes and negotiations.
Yeah, for sure.
It just goes to show how a seemingly straightforward situation can get complicated really fast.
It's true. And it's a reminder that the law isn't always black and white. There are often a lot of gray areas, and understanding those nuances is critical for making informed decisions. Toledo's initial choice to make that payment without a clear protest or reservation, it ultimately backfired when they decided to challenge the assessment.
That's true. And on the other side, the BIR accepting that payment without pushing for a formal agreement, that came back to bite them too.
It really does.
Yeah. It's a fascinating example of how strategic decisions, or the lack of them, can have big consequences down the line.
It's like a game of legal chess where every move matters.
Exactly. Speaking of moves, let's shift gears a bit and delve into some of the key legal doctrines that were at play in this case. The Supreme Court really leaned on the concept of estoppel. So let's unpack that a little. What exactly does that mean?
Okay, estoppel. It can sound kind of intimidating, but it's a pretty simple concept. In basic terms, it means you're prevented from going back on your word or your actions, especially if someone else relied on them, to their detriment. Think of it this way. You promise a friend you'll help them move, and they rely on that promise to, make all these arrangements. You can't back out at the last minute just because you don't feel like it. It wouldn't be fair to your friend who is counting on you.
I like that analogy. So in the Toledo Power case, the Supreme Court basically said that Toledo couldn't backtrack on that payment because they hadn't explicitly protested it when they made it. Their silence kind of implied acceptance, and that led the BIR to believe it was all settled.
Exactly. The BIR relied on that silence and the payment and chose not to go after the full amount. They might have acted differently if Toledo had, voiced those objections right from the start.
So it's all about fairness, right? Holding people accountable for their actions.
Yeah, exactly.
What other legal doctrines were in play here?
Well, the Supreme Court also brought up the idea of an informal settlement. They considered Toledo's payment to be an agreement to resolve the tax dispute, even though there wasn't, an actual written contract.
So even without that signed document, actions and conduct can create a binding agreement. That's important for everyone to remember.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The law recognizes that not every agreement has to be formally documented to be enforceable. Those informal settlements, based on, mutual understanding and how people act, they can carry legal weight.
So they saw the payment itself as proof of an agreement to settle, along with all the circumstances around it.
That's right. They treated it like a compromise. Toledo paid a smaller amount to avoid potentially owing a much bigger amount, and the BIR accepted that smaller sum to close their investigation.
So it seems like even those casual agreements can have serious legal consequences.
They definitely can. It's a reminder to be mindful of your actions, how you communicate, even in informal situations, because those words and actions, they can create legal obligations even without a formal contract.
We really have to be aware of those potential consequences of our choices, whether we're dealing with taxes, business deals, or even, personal agreements.
Absolutely. Always good to be mindful.
This all leads back to what we were talking about earlier, being informed and proactive when it comes to legal matters. It's not enough to just know the law, right? We need to understand how it's applied in real-world situations.
Exactly. This CIRV Toledo Power Company case gives us a fascinating peek into the complexities of tax law, legal strategy, and the principles behind agreements and settlements.
It's a reminder that even situations that seem straightforward at first can have hidden depths.
For sure.
And it highlights the need for all of us, whether we're business owners, taxpayers, or just regular people, to be informed and proactive when we're dealing with legal issues.
Definitely.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening for me, and I hope our listeners are finding it insightful and engaging as well.
You too. There's always more to explore, isn't there?
Always. But before we go any further, let's take a quick break. We'll be back in a bit to wrap up our deep dive into this really intriguing case.
Sounds good.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We're talking about that intriguing case, CIR v. Toledo Power Company. Lots of twists and turns, huh?
Definitely a case that keeps on giving. We've been talking about estoppel, informal settlements, clear communication, but I think there's another layer here we should look at.
Yeah, I'm intrigued.
It's the concept of solutio in debiti.
Solutio in debiti. Okay, now that sounds like something straight out of a law school exam. What does that even mean?
It does sound pretty technical, right? But it's actually a pretty simple idea at its core. Imagine you accidentally overpay a bill, like your electricity bill or something. You'd want that money back, right?
Of course.
That's basically what solutio in debiti is all about. It's a legal principle that lets you recover payments that you made by mistake, or if there was no legal basis for making them.
Oh, okay, so it's like a refund for something you paid but you shouldn't have in the first place.
Exactly. So how does this apply to the Toledo Power case? Well, Toledo argued that they had mistakenly paid that VAT amount because they believed the sale of power to CCC, remember they're an exporter, should have been zero rated. They invoked solutio in debiti, claiming that the government basically got unjustly enriched by their mistaken payment.
So they were basically saying, hey, we gave you this money by accident, give it back.
Pretty much. But did it work?
I have a feeling I know the answer.
Well, unfortunately for Toledo, the Supreme Court didn't agree. Remember, they ruled that the payment wasn't a mistake, but part of that informal settlement, a deliberate action to resolve the dispute.
Right, they saw it as a strategic move, not just a whoops moment.
Exactly. And because the court classified it as a settlement, that solutio in debiti principle didn't apply.
So even if Toledo truly believed they were right about that zero rating, the fact that they made the payment as part of this, perceived agreement meant they couldn't use solutio in debiti to get a refund.
That's the key takeaway here. It's a remedy for mistaken payments, not for payments made as part of a compromise, even if you later regret making that compromise.
It really reinforces how important clarity is when you're dealing with legal stuff, especially taxes. If you're making a payment under protest, you got to make that crystal clear. No room for misunderstanding.
Absolutely. Document everything. State your objections up front and in writing, and if there's any doubt about what you're doing, get a legal professional involved. It's always better to err on the side of caution.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into CIRV Toledo Power Company, what are the biggest takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I think there are a few key points. First, understanding what those agreements mean, even the informal ones, those handshake deals. Second, the importance of clear and straightforward communication, especially in legal matters. And finally, that legal strategy really matters when navigating complex situations.
This case shows us that the law isn't just a bunch of rules and regulations. It's about how those rules actually play out in real life. It highlights why we all need to be informed and proactive when we're dealing with legal issues.
Well said. CIRV Toledo Power Company is a really fascinating example of how these legal principles can intersect and play out in unexpected ways. It's a reminder that knowledge is power. Understanding your rights and responsibilities is crucial for making informed decisions.
This deep dive has definitely been eye-opening. I hope our listeners are finding it as insightful and interesting as we are.
Me too.
What stood out to you most from this case? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and tell us what resonated with you.
And while you're at it, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay tuned for more deep dives into these fascinating topics. We're exploring a new case, law, or legal concept every week, so come along with us on this journey of legal discovery.
See you next time on The Deep Dive. Welcome back, everyone. We've been really digging into this CIRV Toledo Power Company case, uncovering all the legal twists and turns.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
It has. We've talked about estoppel, those informal settlements, the power of clear communication.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have. But there's one more piece of this puzzle I think we should look at. It's something called solutio in debiti.
Ah, yes. Solutio in debiti.
Now, I'll be honest, that sounds a little intimidating. Like, straight out of law school, what does that even mean?
It does sound a bit technical, doesn't it? But the idea is actually pretty straightforward. Imagine you accidentally overpay a bill.
Oh.
Like your phone bill, let's say. You wouldn't just want to let that extra money go, would you?
No way. I'd want that back.
Exactly. And that's essentially what solutio in debiti is all about. It's a legal principle that lets you recover payments that you made by mistake, or if there was no real legal reason for you to make them in the first place.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of like a refund for something you shouldn't have paid.
Exactly. So how does this apply to our case, the Toledo Power case? Well, Toledo argued that they had made a mistake by paying that VAT amount.
Right.
Because they believed, remember, that the sale of power to CCC as an exporter should have been zero rated.
Right.
So they invoked solutio in debiti, claiming that the government had essentially been, unfairly enriched by their mistake.
So basically they were saying, hey, we accidentally gave you this money, time to give it back.
Yeah, pretty much. But the question is, did that argument work?
What do you think?
Well, in this case, unfortunately for Toledo, the Supreme Court didn't buy it. Remember, they ruled that the payment wasn't a mistake, but rather part of that informal settlement, a deliberate move to resolve the dispute.
Right, the whole strategic decision thing?
Exactly. And because they saw it as a settlement, not a mistake, the solutio in debiti principle didn't apply.
So even if Toledo genuinely believed they were in the right about that zero rating, the fact that they paid as part of an agreement, or what the court saw as an agreement, meant they couldn't use this solutio in debiti to get their money back.
That's the key takeaway here. Solutio in debiti is about truly mistaken payments, not about payments made as part of a compromise, even if you end up regretting that compromise later on.
This case really shows how important it is to be crystal clear when you're dealing with legal matters, especially taxes. If you're making a payment, but you're doing it under protest, you have to make that absolutely clear, right?
Absolutely. Don't leave any room for interpretation. Document everything. Clearly state your objections, and if there's even a shadow of a doubt, talk to a legal professional. Always better to be safe than sorry.
Couldn't agree more. So as we wrap up our deep dive into CIRV Toledo Power Company, what are the biggest takeaways we want our listeners to remember?
Well, I think there are a few key things to keep in mind. First, understanding the weight of those agreements, even the informal ones, those handshake deals we make. Second, being really clear and direct in our communication, especially when it comes to legal stuff. And third, that legal strategy can really make a difference in navigating these complex situations.
It all comes down to being informed, right? Knowing your rights, being proactive, and understanding that the law isn't always black and white. There are those gray areas. And knowing how to navigate those can be crucial.
Absolutely. The CIRV Toledo Power Company case is a fantastic example of how these legal principles intersect and how things can play out in unexpected ways. Knowledge is power. And understanding those rights and responsibilities can really empower you to make informed decisions.
Well, this deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about. I hope our listeners feel the same way.
Me too. It's been a great discussion.
It has. What stood out to you most about this case? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment below and let us know what resonated with you.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future episodes. We're exploring a new case or legal concept every week, so come join us on this journey of legal discovery.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.